Even though I always try not to go first, it seems I've been stuck with that honor. But just as an introduction, since our two panels have been merged, I'm Douglas Greene. I'm a writer, historian. I'm an author of a forthcoming book next year on the French communist Louis-Auguste Blanqui. But today I'm talking to you about radical themes in mass culture. So forgive me if it doesn't quite mesh with art against capitalism. Full disclosure, if any of the shows I mention, I give spoilers, so if you don't want to know what happens, cover your ears or something. But anyway, to begin, in the episode Oathkeeper of HBO's wildly popular series, Game of Thrones, Queen Daenerys Targaryen, who has just liberated the city, Meereen, a city full of slaves. While being praised by the now free slaves, Daenerys also decrees that 163 slave masters are to be crucified on the road to the city, the same number of slaves they had crucified as a warning. When one of her advisors warns against such actions, saying that sometimes it is best to answer injustice with mercy, Daenerys responds, "I will answer injustice with justice." Now, although the mass media and culture by and large support and propagate the values and ideology of capitalism, this scene from Game of Thrones is just one of the many examples of radical themes that appear throughout mass culture, whether on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, Star Trek, or Arrow, to just give some examples. Now, before discussing some of the radical themes of mass culture, it's important that we do three things. First, understand that the mass media is a business, which is governed by the profit motive and concentrated in the hands of a small group of owners. According to media analyst Robert McChesney, the U.S. film industry has been a tight-knit club effectively controlled by 6 or 7 studios since the 1930s. That remains the case. The 6 largest U.S. firms accounted for over 90% of U.S. theater revenues in 1997. All but 16 of Hollywood's 148 widely distributed in 600 or more theater films in 1997 were produced by these 6 firms, and many of those 16 were produced by companies that had distribution deals with one of the 6 majors. Yet the media industry, in order to produce, is also dependent upon the funding of advertisers. And if the programs shown by the mass media do not attract the required funding, then they find themselves at a decided disadvantage in the marketplace. In this atmosphere, we should not expect, with perhaps notable exceptions, advertisers to fund progressive or radical programming, which it would not only be risky, but they would prefer to play it safe and to pay for what appears to be profitable. Rather, the role of advertising is to create a consumer culture that McChesney says produces profound cynicism and greed, both cancerous to public life. If you have any doubt that the values of consumer culture are not predominant in television or movies, just watch programs such as The Big Bang Theory, Gossip Girl, or 2.5 Men, though I actually like Gossip Girl. Secondly, we should not be surprised that the mass media, like the churches, schools, and courts, reflect and propagate the reigning ideology of capitalism. As Karl Marx said, the ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas. Thus, the ideology permeating the media is utterly opposed to communism, socialism, internationalism, anti-colonialism ad infinitum. By contrast, the ideological production of the mass media is one of consumer culture, anti-communism, glorification of the police, dog-eat-dog, nationalism, racism, etc. And you can just watch American Sniper, The Interview, or Law and Order, for example. Yet, as we shall see, the reigning ideology is not total or unchallenged. So let us take the case of revolution. Revolution is most often shown in Hollywood as something that is led by depraved people, showing people with no independent role, and the vision of revolution presented is one that is unsustainable since there is naturally no alternative to capitalism. An example can be found with the villain Bane from The Dark Knight Rises. Bane desires to overthrow the corrupt of Gotham City, manipulating the people to come to power, unleashing total chaos and breaking down society. Ironically, in Bane's revolution, it is the police and the wealthy who are portrayed as the victims, while the city is ruled by voracious ex-prisoners. Yet Bane's vision is not one of a new society, but has a literal half-life, since he possesses a nuclear bomb that will go off in a matter of months. Ultimately, Batman is able to stop Bane and a nuclear apocalypse, returning society to normal. And the moral of The Dark Knight Rises is to warn us from the perils of revolutionary transformation. Yet I'd add a bit of nuance to this. The media does not just glorify counter-revolution and condemn uprisings, even if they are violent. In fact, Hollywood loves upheavals and revolutions so long as the end result is one that reinforces liberal values. We can see this in films such as Star Wars. And another example is that of Mel Gibson's Braveheart, a widely inaccurate historical epic of the life of William Wallace and the struggle of the Scots for independence. I actually do like this film, even despite what I'm going to say. Throughout the film, Wallace accepts without question the titles of the nobility and the prevailing class system. In fact, it should be said that ultimately the message of the film is that Wallace needs to be a martyr in order to inspire the good king, Robert the Bruce, to lead the Scots to freedom. Yes, for Braveheart, the problem is not with kings or class, but to make sure that the good and noble kings wind up in charge who don't see class but serve the people impartially. And Mel Gibson's ultra-conservatism fascism, to the contrary, Braveheart is actually the ultimate liberal film. But as Antonio Gramsci, the famous Italian Marxist, would say, the mass media is not, with few exceptions, run by the state, but an organ of civil society. These organs of civil society are the vehicles through which the capitalist class gains its legitimacy through the consent given by the great masses of the people to the general direction imposed upon social life by the fundamental group. This consent is historically caused by the prestige and confidence which the dominant group enjoys because of its position and function in the world of production. In other words, the bourgeoisie, being the ruling class who control the state and the means of production, is able to disseminate its ideas and ideology throughout civil society in order to establish their hegemony, although this is, again, not uncontested. The mass media enforces or draws upon the common sense of bourgeois ideology to enforce its rule. For in capitalist society, there's no pure philosophy or ideology, but rather various philosophies or conceptions that exist, and people make a choice between them. And these various philosophies are often absorbed by common people in fragmentary and contradictory ways that are reflected throughout the media. For example, Law and Order portrays cops who are naturally protect ordinary citizens. The Big Bang Theory shows even the smartest can think of little more than comic book collecting or viewing women as sex objects. And Gossip Girl glorifies the lives, glamour, and beauty of the young rich, while showing that we should aspire to achieve that status. These ideas contribute to people refusing to question their oppression or capitalism, but to accept them all as natural, and all this is considered to be just common sense. And yet the ideas of common sense reflected in the media are not just a single coherent rational view of the world, just as we see all kinds of reactionary and conservative and liberal ideas on TV and television. These coexist with other elements of well, which may contain small seeds of progressive, socialist, or communist consciousness that Gramsci would call good sense. And Gramsci believed that it's important for Marxists to interrogate these examples of good sense in order to develop their elements into a more coherent fashion. So where can we see ideology itself as a site for struggle and the elements of good sense showing up? Let us return to Game of Thrones, which is set in a fictional universe of feuding monarchs and feudal lords. The contrast of Game of Thrones to the more typical romanticized portrayals of feudalism in Lord of the Rings could not be greater. In Lord of the Rings, kings, knights, and the common people are all united in a great cause without regard for social class, always motivated and acting according to the codes of honor and chivalry. In Game of Thrones, while there are the same codes of honor and chivalry, which are espoused by the nobles, in fact, if you are to succeed in the Game of Thrones, then it takes building alliances, isolating opponents, acting with means both fair and foul to take power and to maintain it. Those characters who understand the realpolitik of power are able to succeed, while those who don't are crushed. The politics in Game of Thrones resembles a Hobbesian war of all against all. And as Queen Cersei would say, when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle grounds. What Game of Thrones shows us, in contrast to many fantasy depictions, is how the ruling class rules. And more than that, the ideas of chivalry and respect for women are shown to be a mere facade for the worst forms of violence and subjugation. Women are not allowed to own or inherit land, only men. Women are under the authority of either their husbands or male relatives. Marriage is not for love, but rather for power and land, and yet women are expected to dress beautifully and bear children, and in war, women are either killed or raped. Now, there are women. We have one example of Queen Cersei, who is willing to use her sexual appeal to her advantage, but there are others women in Game of Thrones who make the effort to conform, to the gender roles expected of them, and others, such as Arya Stark or Brienne of Tarth, who consciously subvert their place in society by taking unconventional roles such as warriors. And others, such as Daenerys, not only become rulers in their own right, but go further and try to liberate slaves, which brings all sorts of many problems. And although we can go much further into the radicalism and stark reality of feudal class politics in Game of Thrones, suffice to say, the series is a radical subversion of the normal depictions of feudalism and any nostalgic view for a better time and ruling class. Now, while the superheroes found in comic books and films such as Batman are not generally radical figures, there are exceptions to this. Take the example of Green Arrow, who was first introduced by DC Comics in the 1940s as a billionaire vigilante named Oliver Queen, who dresses up in a Robin Hood-style outfit to fight criminals. In the 1970s, Green Arrow was reinvented as a supporter of left-wing and anti-racist causes in a popular comic series where he's paired with the more conservative Green Lantern. And in the latest version of Green Arrow, as shown in the currently airing CW series Arrow, we see a figure who is waging a one-man class warfare against the rich and the corrupt. The series has Oliver Queen return home after 5 years stranded on a desert island. After coming back home to Starling City, Oliver takes up the mantle of Green Arrow. His time on the island has caused him to shed his previous playboy ways in order to train himself to fight and survive. Oliver has also promised his father, who died so that he could live, that he would avenge the crimes their family had committed. To this end, he gave Oliver a list of names of the corrupt and powerful. The people on the list are involved in an evil plan orchestrated by the wealthy businessman, Malcolm Merlyn, known as the Undertaking, to destroy the Glades, an impoverished part of the city where Merlin's wife was killed. Merlin wants to punish the people of the Glades for this injustice. Throughout Season 1, Oliver devotes himself to crossing the names off the list and restoring justice to Starling City and working to stop the Undertaking. Oliver describes his mission as follows in the opening monologue of the show, which I have coincidentally always wanted to say. My name is Oliver Queen. For 5 years, I was stranded on an island with only one goal: survive. Now I will fulfill my father's dying wish, to use the list of names he left me and bring down those who are poisoning my city. To do this, I must become someone else. I must become something else. Yet Arrow has come up against the limits of what commercial broadcasting is willing to do. While Oliver Queen is willing to go after the corrupt members of the ruling class, others, including the police and agencies of government, remain his allies. And the only sort of change sought by Green Arrow is via the heroic actions of a vigilante, or the comic book version of propaganda of the deed. Following the first season, the series has moved back from its themes of class warfare and has adopted more conventional stories that I still think are well done, of superpowered villains who want to just destroy the city. Now, if Arrow only reaches the limits of a lone hero fighting against the rich and the powerful, the work of Joss Whedon takes this genre into outright revolutionary territory. Whedon is most well known for his work on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and this told the story of Buffy Summers, who is the latest in a long line of vampire slayers as she and her friends fight evil while attending high school. The show itself is not only a reversal of traditional roles for women in horror genre, but provides excellent social commentary on adolescence. However, Whedon's radicalism truly shines in the spin-off to Buffy, Angel, where he draws upon the themes of Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism. Angel, the title character, is the story of a vampire with a soul as he struggles for redemption while fighting evil and trying to become human as a reward. Throughout the series, Angel fights with a small, fused group of comrades against the forces of evil. Most of the time, he fights against these individual threats and makes appeals to people to change and does not make any effort to change the underlying social conditions. However, change occurs in the final season when Angel and his comrades decide to work for Wolfram and Hart, an evil law firm, I repeat myself, controlled by the faceless senior partners who have key instruments on Earth in powerful positions in the government, in business, etc. Angel hopes that by working for Wolfram and Hart, that he can utilize the resources of the firm to do good. Wolfram and Hart, on the other hand, operate as a totalitizing force that wants to ensure that the apocalypse comes to pass, and for Angel to play a role on their side, as hinted at in an ancient prophecy. However, the apocalypse is not a final battle with a recognizable enemy, as Angel imagines. Rather, the apocalypse has been going on the whole time. One character, Lindsay, says, "What did you think? A gong was going to sound? Time to jump on your horses and fight the big fight? Starting pistol went off a long time ago, boys." This raises the question, if the apocalypse is not a big fight, then what is it? Lindsay clarifies and says, the world keeps sliding towards entropy and degradation. And what do? You sit in your big chair and you sign your checks, just like the senior partners planned. The apocalypse is the continuing exploitation, depravity, and misery of the system. At the same time, as Angel says, Angel and company are not fighting the apocalypse, but every day you sit behind your desk and you learn a little more how to accept the world the way it is. Well, here's the rub. Heroes don't do that. Heroes don't accept the way the world is. They fight it. Thus, Angel and his friends accept the illusion, initially, of many liberals that believe they can change the system from the inside. Angel and his comrades are being whittled down by degrees by accepting the rules and logic of Wolfram and Hart, since they can tweak it to some degree. To this end, they make various cosmetic changes, such as stopping a few heinous practices, such as providing dead bodies to a necromancer. Yet fundamentally, Wolfram and Hart remains a business, and they have to keep it going, and that means recognizing we're a business and we have a bottom line. However, Angel comes to realize the dead end of changing the system from within. And he moves against Wolfram and Hart by wiping out their main representatives on Earth, known as the Circle of the Black Thorn. And Angel employs ruthless tactics to do this. Yet he recognized that his struggle, like that of many revolutionaries, is probably doomed, but is willing to undertake it anyway. And as he says, power endures. We can't bring down the senior partners, but for one bright shining moment, we can show that they don't own us. You need to decide for yourselves if that's worth dying for. So ultimately, Angel ends not with a hero who finds his place in the world, or even redemption, but rather deciding that reform of an unjust system is impossible. The last scene of the series depicts Angel and his few remaining friends facing down tens of thousands of demons in a hopeless battle. Yet Angel isn't concerned about the odds. He looks at a dragon flying above and says with calm, personally, I kind of want to slay the dragon. Then Angel swings the sword, and the screen fades to black. Here, Angel affirms his choice to be a hero who doesn't accept evil in the world, but decides to challenge it, even if he is likely to die. He decides instead to bring down and accept the consequences of his choice, no matter what they are. And this brings us to the final example that I will consider the Star Trek franchise. Yes. The premise of Star Trek is that humanity, who now explore space, have evolved in the 23rd and 4th centuries to become a powerful and technologically advanced utopian communist society without war, poverty, or want. Rather, people are free to develop themselves to their fullest potential. This attitude is expressed as follows by Captain Jean-Luc Picard, played by Patrick Stewart, who also played Lenin at one point, in the film Star Trek First Contact. That's true. I can prove that. As he says, the economics of the future is somewhat different. You see, money doesn't exist in the 21st century. The acquisition of wealth is no longer a driving force in our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity. Star Trek is also one of the few television series that is really able to portray a nuanced and Fanonist depiction of colonialism, anti-colonialism, violence, along with showing the development of communist subjectivity. One of the principal themes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the third spin-off in the series, we won't consider the others, are the effects of the colonial occupation of the planet Bajor by the Cardassians, two alien species. The brutal Cardassian occupation of Bajor not only serves to underline the horrors and injustice of colonialism and imperialism that are practiced by great powers throughout history, but the struggle of the Bajorans serves as an allegory for anti-colonial struggles in our world, whether Jews under Nazism, Palestinians, Irish, Algerians, Vietnamese, what have you. In the Bajoran struggle for national liberation, we can see some of the challenges of attempting to chart an independent course in a universe dominated by imperialist powers. Approximately 50 years before the beginning of the show, and it's shown in flashbacks in many ways, the Cardassian Empire began their occupation of Bajor. Prior to contact with the Cardassians, the Bajorans were peaceful people, agrarian. Initially, the Cardassians, who sought to extract the resources of Bajor for their empire, appeared benevolent, but they soon established a military presence and annexed the planet without resistance. Over the coming decades, the Cardassians instituted slavery, strip mining, and labor camps. And the Cardassians also saw themselves as racially superior, and the Bajorans were treated as inferior subjects by the colonizers and lived in segregated housing and worked in unsafe and dangerous jobs. Bajoran women were used as comfort women by soldiers and perceived as collaborators by other Bajorans. The Cardassians established their own collaborationist government of Bajorans and cultivated a comprador bourgeoisie who got rich from the occupation. By the time the Cardassians were forced to withdraw, 10 million had died, and the planet was devastated. Very quickly, the Bajoran people began to resist the occupation, forming a variety of underground guerrilla organizations. And the writers of Deep Space Nine recognized the truth of anti-colonial resistance that Frantz Fanon observed many years ago: national liberation, national renaissance, the restoration of nationhood to the people, commonwealth, whatever may be the headings used or the new formulas introduced, decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. However, anti-colonial violence is not senseless, but a process that is the creation of new men. If we wish to describe it precisely, we might find it in the well-known words, "The last shall be first, and the first last." Decolonization is the putting it into practice of this sentence. The Bajorans, despite being chastised as inferior, form their own resistance, and their tactics range from sabotaging factories, ambushing soldiers, killing collaborators, and even attempting to kill the prefect of the occupation, Gul Dukat. Most of their tactics are based on surprise, hit and run, and random violence. And although the Bajoran resistance ultimately forced the Cardassians to withdraw and deal with the problems of independence, similar to many post-colonial states in our own world, the Cardassians themselves believed their occupation was justified and remained unapologetic about their brutal actions. Take the speech by Gul Dukat, the former prefect, which could have been uttered by any unrepentant colonialist, whether American, German, or British, or etc. And in attempting to justify it, he says, one of the characters, Cisco, says, "So why don't you think they didn't appreciate this rare opportunity you were offering them?" And Dukat says, "Because they were blind, ignorant fools. If only they had cooperated us, we could have turned their world into a paradise. From the moment we arrived on Bajor, it was clear that we were the superior race. But they couldn't accept that. They wanted to be treated as equals when they most certainly were not. Militarily, technologically, culturally, we were almost a century ahead of them in every way. We did not choose to be the superior race. Fate handed us our role, and it would have been so much easier on the Bajorans if the Bajorans had simply accepted their role. But no, day after day, they clustered in their temples and prayed for deliverance. And night after night, they planted bombs outside of our homes. Pride, stubborn, unyielding pride, from the servant girl that cleaned my quarters to the condemned man toiling in the labor camp to the terrorists skulking in the hills. They all wore their pride like some twisted badge of honor." Now, the series shows the after effects of the Bajoran occupation amongst the Bajorans, but they also show it amongst the Cardassians. There are Cardassians like Dukat who are unapologetic, others who deny the atrocities, and at one point in the series, one Cardassian pretends to be a war criminal, hoping to stand trial and force his people to admit their guilt. Yet there's the example of Damar, a Cardassian military officer who undergoes a striking transformation over the course of the series. Damar begins as a traditional officer interested in restoring the broken glory of his people. When Cardassia allies with the powerful and expansionist Dominion to fight the Federation, Damar eventually becomes the leader of Cardassia. Yet he recognizes that Cardassia is growing subordinate to the Dominion and they are becoming a conquered people. Damar, after first succumbing to alcohol, eventually leads a military rebellion against the Dominion to restore Cardassian freedom. The rebellion grows slowly, and Damar, unlike many of his compatriots, is willing to do what it takes to win. He even takes on a former Bajoran resistance fighter, Kira Nerys, as an advisor to learn guerrilla tactics. Damar decides to fight not as a traditional officer, but to lead a people's war. To effectively fight a people's war and to win means that the commanders have to be fused with the people in their struggle for liberation. Damar comes to understand that his role is not to recreate the old Cardassia, but to fight for a new society. And this is most dramatically emphasized when he learns that his wife and son were killed, and they had nothing to do with his rebellion. When Kira learns the news and Damar's disbelief at the casual brutality of such acts, she reminds him that he had killed innocent people, and he had wanted to restore the old Cardassia who had occupied and massacred her planet. When the Dominion wipes out the organized resistance, it seems that the rebellion is crushed, but it's clear to Kira that Damar has become a legend, the embodiment of a dream of liberation. And this sparks a mass civilian uprising. When it's revealed to the populace that Damar is alive, this not only leads to resistance, but revolution. And the working class of the Cardassians soon begins sabotaging key facilities, whether communications or power stations, and this sparks reprisals by the Dominion who massacre millions. And these reprisals don't end the rebellion, but lead to the defection of the military and The Dominion eventually decides to exterminate the Cardassians in retaliation, and in the end, the Cardassians are able to liberate themselves, although at the cost of millions of lives, including that of Damar. Although DS9 leaves it an open question of what type of Cardassian will emerge from the rubble of war and genocide, the transformation of Damar and potentially Cardassian society is a clear sense of development of revolutionary communist consciousness. Damar recognizes his rebellion is about emancipating all the oppressed and transcending the methods and horrors of the past. He does not want to become like the Dominion or like the old Cardassia, but to become something else. And even though Damar suffered at the hands of the Dominion, his goal is not revenge, but a social transformation. In the end, the struggle for freedom transformed him from not just saying that a particular group of oppressors need to be removed and replaced by others, but the society needs to be transformed. To conclude, the function of the mass media is that of a for-profit business dependent upon advertisers in the market for propagating the ideology of the ruling class and its common sense. And again, that does not mean radical and revolutionary themes cannot be found in mass culture. In fact, ideology itself is a battleground, and while there are reactionary and conservative elements, there is also progressive good sense as well. And many of those examples of good sense that I've discussed provide in many cases, a nuanced and meaningful elaboration of radical ideas. Thank you.